First of all, it kind of starts with a marketer who knows what he wants to say and who he wants to say it to. And then what do you need from the back-end team? What elements do you need to personalize this message in the most relevant way?
You're using all of your tools in the appropriate way at the appropriate time. And that's something that so many marketers can benefit from because you're getting a lot more return out of those efforts that you're putting forth.
That's right. Shamir, one thing I would just kind of double down on there is
today on the pod, we're speaking to Drew DeMasters. Drew is VP of Lifecycle Marketing for Prodege. We'll start by talking about multi-channel marketing and multi-channel orchestration and why it's so important that we realize that people are so flooded with information. How do we manage all those touch points? We'll also talk to Drew about testing and his philosophy around testing and looking at that data from the standpoint of different segments of the audience, not just the audience in bulk in itself. We'll also be talking to Drew about the importance of alignment between marketing and IT. You know how much we love talking about this subject on the show, and Drew has loads of experience when it comes to making sure those two groups are in lockstep. We're excited to be talking to Drew today. Let's get started. Drew, we're very happy to have you on the podcast today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
It's exciting to get to talk to someone in your field because of the nature of the way that you have to deal with the consumer. As you know, our show really talks about the digital customer experience, in particular that post-click experience. And that part of the experience is really where you kind of live and breathe. You've got that person to come in your business. It's about getting that person to register and then ultimately getting them to activate and actually start to get value out of the relationship that you're ultimately trying to build with them. And that can be a real challenge. I mean, the registration part, that's always easy. You know, clients always say, can you get me more leads? Like getting you a lead is an easy part. Getting you a qualified lead is the hard part, right? So same principle here, getting people to register, that's relatively easy. It's really activating them and getting them on a path to value that's really going to be challenging for you. So as you begin to think about the nature of your business, how do you look at that path to value? How do you think about it in terms of how you get people to engage with you, get on that path, and what are those signals that you're looking for?
Prodege runs a number of loyalty points websites, kind of the flagship being Swagbucks, InboxDollars. There's others as well. And really the promise is get points for free gift cards or for college savings. We have the YouPromise brand as well. And there's many ways to earn points on the sites and in our apps. You can play games, you can take surveys, you can shop online, there's do scanning grocery receipts, all these different ways. And so we real quickly need to figure out, what is this person who just signed up on our platform? What are they here to do? They're here to, we know what our promise to them is. They're here to get free gift cards or to save for college. But how do they want to do that? So we real quickly need to kind of synthesize our various offerings that we have down to them in a really clean pitch.
So as you do that and think about that, kind of what is that initial interaction? So you've got this person to register, and now it's kind of, okay, how do we figure out how to get this person actually active on the platform? What's that kind of that first impression, that first session? What's that kind of that onboarding experience look like?
Right. So our first clue is what is their source? How did they come to us? Was it a paid channel? Was it through a shopping keywords that, was it play games online? What was the source of their registration? And that's really the first, you're looking at it blindly. That's the first thing we have as a clue as to why they're here.
And do you have a lot of kind of historical data that kind of lets you know that if people come in from certain channels or perhaps answer different questions in certain ways that kind of nudge them in a certain direction in terms of how you're going to end up personalizing the experience for them?
We do, right. When they first sign up for our sites, if we know absolutely nothing about them, we'll refer heavily to the campaign or the source, as I mentioned. But right away, we're looking for what parts of the site or the app are they engaging with? What are these different signals that they're telling us that they're interested in doing? And so we're monitoring that, and we're trying to personalize our onboarding, our messaging to them based on their activity.
And that's interesting that you do that, right? I'm wondering, do you weigh those things differently? So obviously when the person first interacts, all you know about them is the campaign they came from, for all intents and purposes, right? But then if they do register or they start that registration process, now they're starting to give you more behavioral information, right? Because as you mentioned, you're starting to see what parts of the website, the app they're interacting with. Do you weigh all those things equally, or are there certain things that maybe get a little more weight than others as you start to gather more information about the person?
So with our various sites and apps, one of the key things that you'll come across is as you sign up, and I encourage folks to join any of these platforms, Swagbucks ideally, is to take the profile survey. It's basically a getting to know you questionnaire. It's your age, your income, your gender, do you have kids or not, and just basic demographics. And so we store that. And yes, that is helpful from a demographic perspective, knowing kind of what bucket that we can think of you as, right? Uh, so we have that, and we'll give you some points for filling out that profile. That profile, by the way, is useful in enabling paid surveys for you to do on our sites. We can't really serve you those until you've given us some of that basic information. But anyway, so we'll use that, and then we'll start looking to the behavior triggers, right, as to what is this person doing.
Gotcha. So it's really is a combination of things, and you're kind of using each element to kind of help inform and kind of move them to the next step, so to speak, which then gives you more intelligence, which then you leverage to kind of get them to the next step after that. So it sounds like a very iterative process. And I like the fact that you really laid that out the way you did, because a lot of the enterprise marketers who are listening to the show, it's a challenge for them to be able to customize, to personalize their experience. And the way that you guys are doing it, leveraging that profile so heavily, is just such a powerful way of doing that, especially because there is an intrinsic reason why the person would want to complete the profile, right? Part of why they're joining, right, is to be able to kind of give you some of that information. So there's value for them to give you this additional intelligence about them. And then now you're able to leverage that intelligence to give them a more meaningful experience. So it's a bit of a kind of a give and take experience, it sounds like, as people interact with the platforms.
It is, yeah. That profile is valuable to us for the matching things up with you to various ways to earn on our site. It's also valuable in the sense that we'll give you points for doing that activity. And like I said, it'll open up survey earning opportunities to you because now we know some of that basic information. And it's also a signal that you're really interested. If you don't bother to fill out your profile, we're going to be really kind of generic. We don't know a lot about you other than the campaign, as I mentioned. So it's a signal that is this person really on the path or not.
Obviously, you have the points scenario, which inherently is, but do you use kind of gamification tactics and other ways to help people stay engaged?
We do. We have one of our more popular features on the site is the to-do list. And this is something that I'm a big fan of. And so I try to do it every day. And you do 6 or 7 different activities, and you earn, 1 or 2 points for each of those activities. And you get a small bonus once you've done all the activities. So yeah, we have that as well as other engagement hooks on the website, different events that happen throughout the month to try to bring them back and draw them back and keep them earning towards their goal.
So I'm wondering then, obviously, in the ideal perfect world, people would come back to the website or come back to the app on their own on a regular basis to do this. But I'm sure you have to kind of reach out and use some digital touch points to kind of remind people and get people to come back. How do you think about that in terms of the different channels that you're using to communicate, whether that's push notifications, whether that's SMS, whether that's email? How are you thinking about orchestrating those things to keep people engaged?
In lifecycle marketing, I'll use any tool. I think of myself as like a carpenter, and I have a tool pouch, and I need a hammer, I need a screwdriver, I probably need a pair of pliers. I need various tools to engage these customers. And so email is a key piece, right? It's a major piece, but it's certainly not the only piece. And some people, we're all flooded with way too many emails. Maybe email's not the channel for you. Maybe it's mobile push. Maybe it's an in-app message, in our app. Maybe it's an on-site message that we send if you're logging into our website every day. Another tactic that we've used with some success is display ad retargeting. Google or Facebook, Meta, using will run an ad on keep earning to your first free gift card. We might resurface the promise that brought you to sign up originally. We might resurface that to you a week or 10 days later. It's like, oh yeah, I just stumbled across this as I'm browsing the web.
Are you using the data for those digital touch points to understand how effective they are? Are you thinking about that holistically, just kind of in aggregate? Are you thinking about that in segments? Or is it truly kind of a one-to-one that you can kind of say, well, this is how Drew is interacting with us, and therefore this is what I'm going to use for Drew moving forward?
In general, it's kind of in aggregate because multi-channel marketing has long been the best way to do marketing. It's not one size fits all for everybody. That's the easy thing to do, is to not do multi-channel marketing. However, we all get too much of everything, as I said. So there are some newer tools in the market with various ESPs and whatnot that will try to optimize your channel for you. and they can, detect, oh, Drew is not opening emails. He is engaged in the mobile app. Let's heavy up on messaging to him through the mobile app. So there are tools like that. I have not done testing with whether or not using those tools really drives more engagement or revenue yet, but I'm excited to get into that.
Is testing something that you are doing just in general though, with the different touch points, the different experiences that you're delivering?
Yes, for sure. I mean, at the base level, it's really does sending messages in general matter. So we'll measure that in kind of a test and holdout group. We might have a holdout group of members who don't see any of these messages at all from any channel. And then we'll have a group that sees, anything that they're eligible to see, they'll see it. And then we can, start to dive in as to, well, which channel is better? Which channel should we use? So yeah, it requires a careful segmentation, setup, being able to identify who's in the test group, who's in the holdout group, when were they entered into each of those groups, and what does that kind of mean?
How do you kind of handle kind of like new ideas, maybe touch points or ways of leveraging certain touch points that maybe you hadn't used historically that maybe comes up as a potential way to use in data or customer feedback, or perhaps you're seeing a competitor use it? How do you kind of layer those things into kind of your orchestration to see how those things perform?
Yeah, so we'll often do just an ad hoc test, pull a select of members, active engaged members who fit XYZ criteria, and test out a new channel. I remember years ago I did this with Pinterest, for example. Do Pinterest display ads matter for our audience? And that's more of a female heavy platform, and they did kind of resonate with that segment of our audience. So that's how we would do it. If there was enough lift, again in the test and holdout structure, then yes, we would introduce that channel into our life cycle and our messaging options, right?
There's something that you mentioned there that I want to make sure to kind of hone in on. You mentioned that in the test example you gave for Pinterest, that you saw performance, positive performance and results specifically in that segment of your audience. So it sounds like that when you're doing this testing, when you're introducing these different touch points and seeing how people interact, again, you're not measuring that just in one bulk group holistically, but you're kind of saying, well, does this work for perhaps different demographics within the customer base that we're kind of communicating with? Is that accurate? Did I get that right?
That is correct. And a lot of times the reason you need to drill in is because the initial blush, the test versus holdout, maybe there was no lift. Maybe it doesn't have the impact you're expecting. But then when you start to check, well, what about this segment? And what about this segment? Then sure enough, something pops up. And you're like, oh yeah, here's a sweet spot that we could really use this channel for this particular type of audience, right?
And I imagine that's pretty important for you, right? Because the nature of your audience and what you're trying to do with the audience, there's power in diversity, right? Because you're leveraging some of this audience to do things like complete surveys and things like that. And of course, it's nice for you to be able to say, okay, well, we want to get the survey data specifically from women between the ages of, 18 to 32. And to be able to have that diversified audience is probably pretty powerful for you.
It is, yeah. Our advertising clients, they come to us they want to spin up a survey for, just as you said, some audience or some demographic range who are stay-at-home moms or whatever their criteria might be, right? And so we will look for that base in our panel, and we've got a very large panel. We'll pull a segment of, okay, here's those members who fit that criteria. We'll spin up a survey to them, reward them points for answering that survey, and that's kind of how that works.
And that's such a powerful factor to use in any really B2C marketing, right? Because we want to think about people certainly in aggregate, kind of at first blush. I mean, that's important as a starting point, but the opportunity to dig into those different segments and see how different groups of people react. And those segments can be demographic, they can be psychographic, depending on the data that you have about that group's people. They can be behavioral, depending on what people have done and what products they're interacting with, right? There's all these different opportunities to be able to say, how do these specific audiences react with portions of the experience? How do they react to specific touch points, to specific, particularly potentially advertising channels? And then to leverage those things, as you mentioned, use that nice analogy earlier, as a carpenter, now you've got the right tool for the right job, so to speak, right? You're using all of your tools in the appropriate way at the appropriate time. And in the end, you end up speaking to all your audience, but you're speaking to them in a very powerful and appropriate way for each group. And that's something that so many marketers can benefit from, because now the efforts you're putting forth, they're going to see, X 10x return on those efforts because you're not just treating everyone exactly the same. You're using the right tool for the right audience at the right time in the right way, and you're getting a lot more return out of those efforts that you're putting forth.
That's right. Shamir, and one thing I would just kind of double down on there is that the behavior activity is really some of the most powerful and predictive audiences you can build based on your customer's behavior. But within that, so now we've got a group, let's say, of shoppers. Okay, here's some behavior. They recently shopped. Within that, though, then you start segmenting your messages based on who they are, and you use that as personalization and versioning of that audience, right? So you might have here's shoppers, and then you've got males or females or whatever, homeowners, whatever those segments are, and then versioning your message to them to be most relevant.
That's powerful. I'm wondering if we could talk just a minute about your tech stack. And the MarTech tools that you're using to do that. Obviously, we hear about a lot of modern tools. You mentioned, obviously, ESPs and a lot of the things that they're able to do. We hear a lot about the importance now of having a nice, robust data warehouse. Some customers are using customer data platforms to help stitch together data from different sources. Can you just talk at a high level about some of the tools that you're leveraging and how you're using that tool set to be able to accomplish all those beautiful things?
Of course. We have long been a Salesforce Marketing Cloud shop. We've been using them for many, many years. And we use them for lifecycle emails. We've used Airship for mobile pushes and in-app messages. That's the mobile marketing tool that we've used. And the way that has kind of been set up is that working with our dev engineers and our BI team to get the data that we need in both of those platforms to do the triggered messages that we want to do, right? First of all, it kind of starts with a marketer who knows what he wants to say and who he wants to say it to. And then what do you need from the back end team? And, what elements do you need? Do you need name? Do you need the game that they clicked on? What elements do you need to personalize this message in the most relevant way? So that's been our history up to now. We're excited, though. We've just signed with Braze, and we're kicking off a migration to them actually starting this month. So those channels are going to be streamlined into one platform, and it's going to be great for the team to really be able to string, email, mobile push, in-app, SMS, all of it together in one tool.
There's a couple of things there I want to be able to explore. And I'm probably going to do them in the reverse order you mentioned them. First of all, you mentioned that transition to Braze and the ability to streamline. And a lot of times, MarTech tools will kind of come to the table, so to speak, saying that they're kind of the answer to all your questions. They can do everything. And some tools can do that. They're kind of purpose built to be able to manage multi-channel. Braze is one of those tools that's done that. Other tools have kind of become a bit of a jumble of multiple tools that have kind of been yanked together and kind of duct taped together to make them work together, and that's not nearly as fluid. And I like the fact that the way that you kind of talked about your team streamlining is you started with kind of the challenge, the problem, the goal of what you want to accomplish. And then you're saying, okay, great. Now that we understand that, what's the best tool set to bring to the table that's going to really kind of help us to innovate, and it's going to help us to accelerate that process. And it sounds like that decision to make this migration over to Braze is really about saying, hey, we know what we want to do, what we want to accomplish. What's the best tool set to help us innovate and accelerate that process? And that's what's kind of driving this direction. Is that an accurate summary?
Yes, it is. And we're excited as marketers to have a platform where we can do all of this channel messaging within one tool set, right? Because any of these are built where you just say, I want to send this type of message. Okay, you just drag it into the flow and off you go. And it also reduces the dev and engineering work on our side. So because, for example, when we want to send an event through an email platform, such as Marketing Cloud right now, that's one dev ticket, right, to have that event triggered with all the attributes and any kind of information we want with it. And then if we want to do the same message through mobile, that's a separate dev ticket to have it sent through Airship. So where you consolidate that is that cuts down on the engineering time by half. And then it enables the marketer much more quickly to, put any tools that are in the platform. And there's others as well. We looked at Iterable. We've looked at other platforms that are very powerful in this regard on stringing these messages together.
That kind of leads me to the other thing that you mentioned earlier that I want to touch on, which is the importance of the alignment between yourself, between IT, engineering, right? Between these internal groups, be it the BI team, to make these things actually happen. Because that's something that we really kind of pound the drum on here on the podcast is that the importance of alignment between marketing and IT, the technical teams, the engineering teams, and the marketing kind of business side, to make sure that they're really in lockstep in understanding what they want to accomplish and what they want to do. Because in so many enterprise organizations, and especially legacy enterprise organizations, that can become so problematic when you're dealing with those legacy, often proprietary systems. It's not as easy to make a transition, and I'm not implying your transition is going to be easy, but as easy to make a transition to a new platform, and you have a whole bunch of platforms, many of them older, that you have to kind of make work together. So, marketing and the business side and IT and the engineering side really have to be on the same page to maximize the most of what they're doing. Are those the kind of challenges that you've worked with over the years?
Yes, they are. And I think for my career at least, I got my MBA in marketing many years ago and kind of studied advertising at that time. My first job was in database marketing, I was like, well, this is very different from what I studied. But anyway, my role over my career has largely been that gap between marketing, which is kind of right brain, and more tech, which is left brain. I kind of plug that hole and get those two teams to relate to each other. And then I write the tickets, I communicate back and forth, whatever it might be. But having someone who's able to kind of speak both languages, right?
And that's funny that you use that analogy, because that's exactly the way we talk about it. We talk about the fact that marketing speaks French and IT speaks Sanskrit, and it's like they can't understand each other. And you've probably seen it throughout your career, the amount of time and the amount of money that has been spent and just pretty much lit on fire because of the lack of communication between those two teams, where marketing has not done the best job necessarily of communicating what they want to the technical team. The technical team has taken that, kind of ran with it, comes back and says, "Hey, here's what you asked for." And marketing's like, "That's not at all what I asked for. That's useless to me." And
Happens all the time. Happens all the time. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars later, it's like this was not used at all. This is now gathering dust because of the inability to communicate and bring alignment.
Yeah, so the tech and the engineering teams, the BI teams have to be in that conversation. And with the ESP review we just went through, the MarTech review, they were in that conversation a lot, to the point that I was concerned we were really taking way too much of their time, in studying this evaluation. But it was so critical that they were on board. They knew the pros and the cons, the different platforms and what we were trying to do. The one thing I'll mention here too, Shamir, is that with my experience, when you get those teams to work best with marketing is when marketing is transparent with them. So here's a campaign we ran. This is what happened, good or bad, and share that with the folks who enabled you to run that campaign. And they may come to you with ideas on, well, we could have done this as well. Why didn't we think of that? Or if nothing else, it just improves that relationship, right?
100%. How do you find in your experience, how much do those technical teams appreciate being involved, that level of transparency from the marketing side? How do they react to that?
Oh, they love it. I mean, they're so welcoming of it because it doesn't happen much. So when they're looped into a conversation on like revealing the results of the campaign that worked or didn't work with them, they're very much on board.
Yeah, I find when marketers are able to be transparent, when they're able to be communicative and collaborative with the technical teams, it really empowers the technical teams to do what they do best. And oftentimes those engineers, those technical teams, they're problem solvers. So when marketing kind of lays out the problem and saying, "Hey, this is the challenge that we're having. This is the goal that we want to accomplish," it really just energizes and fuels those technical teams to say, "Great, let's get to work figuring out how we can solve this, how we can move this down," right? It allows them to express their creativity, granted a different type of creativity from the typical kind of marketing side, but creativity nonetheless. It allows them to really express that, to move that business forward, and ultimately to accomplish the end goal for the organization, right? And kind of get out of the silo of, well, this is what we want to do from a technical standpoint, and this is what we want to do from a marketing standpoint. So I'm sure you've kind of enjoyed that kind of success in the roles that you've played.
Yes, for sure. And it's, from my perspective, it's fun to see other team members shine, so whether it's a junior member on your team, to let them share the results of a campaign, that's one way. Or to let the BI and engineering folks that you worked with, like, be involved in the presentation that you're putting together. That's just such a great, it boosts the connection that you have with those teams. It's a great relationship building aspect of it. It just makes the whole thing work better. And the next time you want to work with those teams again, they're more likely to work with you because you're somebody who's transparent and gives them an opportunity to shine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure it's liberating too, right? As a marketing leader like yourself, because now you have an opportunity to say, I don't have to kind of worry about some of these struggles that can often exist in an organization. I can focus on doing my job, which is thinking about strategy, thinking about planning, thinking about the tactics I want to put in place, focusing on measuring, focusing on results and the things that you're doing to move the business forward. Um, so as you're thinking about those kinds of things as a marketing leader and moving the business forward, one thing you mentioned when we talked last time was you kind of see the world through kind of the 80-20 rule lens. Can you speak to that a little bit about what you mean when you say that?
It's kind of the Pareto principle, right? It's just putting the effort where the results, where it produces results. So, and that means not getting distracted and tied down with busy work, focusing on things that are going to move the needle, whatever that needle might be for your business, and making sure that the fundamentals are working. Like one of the things I learned kind of early on was that if the link is not correctly set up in an email or a mobile push or whatever, then there's no reason to send whatever it is you're about to send, because it just isn't going to work. It's not going to help. It's going to hurt the experience, right? That's going to hurt the expectation of your customer or your member. So testing links, making sure images show up, making sure the places that these things link to or what the user sees next after your message, make sure that it's cohesive with what you're expecting them to see.
Yeah, those things, they sound so basic and fundamental, and they are. But a better way to describe them might be that they're foundational, right? If you're going to do anything more robust, you've got to have a solid foundation. Just back to that same construction analogy, you're building a house, no matter how big the house is, how ornate it is, it's got to have a solid foundation. If it's going to stand, if it's going to weather the storm, it's got to have a solid foundation. So those foundational things are things you can now build on. And then you've got this other challenge as a marketing leader, which I think you alluded to, which is you have to keep the main thing the main thing. You can't allow yourself to kind of get distracted by a multitude of things that sometimes maybe other groups are kind of coming to you and they kind of want you to kind of throw things against the wall to see what sticks. But as you mentioned, you've got to really say, well, here's kind of our main path, our path to success in terms of what we've done from a tactical perspective. And then here are these other elements we can layer on top of, and then kind of test our way and iterate into and understand, is this or is this not going to help us ultimately continue down the path of reaching our goal?
Yeah, it's like you asked earlier about testing different channels. Be open to testing really anything that you haven't tried. And here's the other thing: if you have tried something before and it didn't work, it doesn't mean you shouldn't test it again, because that was a different time, right? It might have been a different set of members. Maybe your traffic was different at that time. So just because you think, well, I've learned that, I'm not testing that again. Ask yourself those questions again, whether it's 6 months later, a year later, whatever it is, but you revalidate your learnings along the way.
Yeah, and that's to me is the beauty of the framework that you've created there and that you've created over the course of your career, in that you understand this fundamental principle that the market is constantly in flux. People are constantly in flux. Your competitors are constantly in flux. So if you'll create a framework that's constantly kind of learning and iterating and just moving through that spin wheel, that flywheel, that cycle on a regular basis, there's no way that you're going to be able to compete and kind of keep up. You've got to constantly be trying and testing different things, or to your point, the same things, because the market has changed since the last time we tested this last year. Consumers have changed since we tested this last year, right? So what wasn't impactful then may be impactful today because of that constant flux that you're constantly trying to navigate. But it comes down to the foundation and the framework that you mentioned that you have to have in place in order to do that effectively, to measure those results, and then ultimately be able to deliver and know where you need to make those twists and turns along the way.
Yeah, that's right. So the way we've kind of done that is have some segment of your audience always testing, right? You might have the control, which is going to this big 90% or 80% or whatever it is, but then have a smaller percentage that you are testing X, Y, and Z, whatever that might be.
Drew, you've had such a great career. As you continue to kind of move your career forward, or wherever that may take you, I'm wondering, what is it about the world of life cycle that you see kind of coming to the fore now, or maybe coming to the fore in the next year to 2 years, that really excites you? What are those things that you're looking forward to kind of getting into, getting your hands on, starting to experiment with? You mentioned a couple earlier, but I'd love for you to expound on that.
Obviously, everything's about AI these days. So the way that AI is used in our marketplace, in the world at large, is going to be key. And much the same way, marketing tools, they all have various AI features, or this is an AI generated thing, this is an AI generated thing. Test those, because even if it's a channel you're using or not using, test the AI capability of that channel and see if that provides some lift for you that you had not seen previously. So that's an exciting thing. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, on these MarTech vendors having the capability of learning what the best channel is for you, validate that maybe that's awesome and maybe that will move the needle for your business. But it might not, because just because I don't open any emails doesn't mean you should never send me an email. Maybe you send me less email, but kind of take that into account. And with respect to my career, I'm excited about personal finance, fintech, e-commerce. Those are kind of industries and areas that I'm looking to really get involved with next, and I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
I think it will be too. Drew, we really appreciate your time today. Really benefited so much from your experience, both from a strategic standpoint, from a tactical standpoint, the things you've done and accomplished. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for the time. I really appreciate it.